From being heated rivals to becoming best friends, the Mario and Sonic series makes me question my existence on this planet. So in this video, I wanted to take a look at the development and eventual demise of the collection of games and take a closer look at why this series started and would eventually fall in a kinda confusing way. Let's start at the beginning, the rise. But first, there's some ground we need to cover. Let's talk about why this was such a big deal in the first place. Back in the 80s, video games were blossoming into what we now know and love, going from arcades to home consoles and making this hobby more mainstream than ever before. This era of home console gaming really took off with the release of Super Mario Bros. For the NES in 1985, solidifying Mario into a lot of gamers' hearts. This was groundbreaking in the video game industry, and that wouldn't go unnoticed. While Nintendo was going ham with Mario, there was a little company known as Sega who wanted to T-pose on the competition and wanted a slice of that pie. So to compete with the giant that was Nintendo in the Mario series, Sega went on to create a new mascot which would target a newer generation of gamers, and thus Sonic was created in 1991 for the Sega Genesis. Sonic's design showed off his cool, edgy attitude and epic appearance. His personality and design traits were a complete standout against Mario's more happy and easygoing manner. Sonic's first game was an instant hit, boosting Sega's home console sales and establishing Sonic as a worthy competitor to Mario. Sonic's success began an era of intense rivalry between Sega and Nintendo, and thus the console wars began. The 1990s were a period of extreme competition between Sega and Nintendo, with both companies aggressively marketing these franchises. Sega's marketing campaign, highlighted by the slogan "Genesis does what Nintendo don't," aimed to position the Genesis as a cooler, more mature option, supported by celebrity endorsements, and of course, Sonic the Hedgehog was the lead seller. Technologically, the Genesis had a faster processor, while the SNES excelled in colors and sound capabilities. The competition led to rapid advancements in gaming technology and expanded the video game market, making characters like Mario and Sonic household names. But then everything changed with the release of the PlayStation in 1995. It dominated the industry and left Sega and Nintendo dumbfounded. It didn't help that in 1995, Sega didn't really have any bangers, and Nintendo, well, they had this, which didn't work out that well. And the Nintendo 64 wouldn't be released until the following year. This was the beginning of gaming in fully 3D environments, and Nintendo and Sega simply weren't there yet. Mario did eventually catch up with the wallop that was Mario 64, but Sonic didn't really get there until the commercial failure that was the Dreamcast with Sonic Adventure. Sure, Sonic Blast existed on the Saturn, but that was more of a 2.5D game, so that doesn't really count. Oh, and we can't forget to mention that PlayStation also had their own mascot with Crash Bandicoot, and also had aggressive marketing against the competitors. While the fight between Nintendo and Sony escalated, Sega was hanging on for dear life with the Dreamcast. And when things didn't go according to plan, it was announced that Sega would pivot into being a third-party developer for other consoles. It wasn't long after that announcement that they would bring the Blue Blur to Nintendo platforms, with Sonic Adventure 2 making it to the GameCube, and there was even a standalone exclusive title on the Game Boy Advance known as Sonic Advance. So we got Sega putting a brand new Sonic IP only on Nintendo platforms. Sonic was eventually released on PlayStation consoles and eventually the Xbox when they released, but let's be real, Sonic thrived on Nintendo consoles. Heck, Crash thrived on Nintendo consoles. Mascots thrived on Nintendo consoles. There's no doubt that fans who liked Mario probably liked Sonic. I know when I was a kid, if it wasn't for my parents buying me a GameCube for Christmas and sprinkling in a couple of those Sonic games, I would not be nearly as invested into the Sonic franchise as I am today. Just look at me. I like Sonic. It was also at this point we could tell Sega and Nintendo squashed their beef and started to get a little more friendly with each other. And there was even rumors of a collab, but mainly their collaboration with the game F-Zero GX would solidify their friendship between the two companies. Series creator Shigeru Miyamoto and Yuji Naka would often casually discuss a potential crossover between the longtime rival franchises, but could never work something out due to the lack of setting that characters could both exist in. The idea of collaborating would eventually be brought up again after Sega was given the license for the Beijing 2008 Olympics. Sega wanted to make an Olympics game that appealed to a larger audience, so they decided to make a fun party game featuring iconic mascots as opposed to a realistic simulation. And thus, they pitched the idea to Nintendo so that they could include the Mario franchise. Nintendo approved this and would work closely with Sega to ensure an extra layer of quality, mainly because the previous year, Sega made a little bit of an oopsie in the quality department, if you know what I mean. Sonic 06, it was trash. Both companies felt the Olympics could be a great setting for a Mario and Sonic collab. And in 2007 at E3, it was shown off. Mario and Sonic at the Olympic Games. At first, I think a lot of fans were just confused about this, and as an adult now, I think I understand why that might be the case. First of all, how is it even possible that these characters can compete with each other? Sonic is much faster than most of the roster. How is this a fair competition? Fundamentally, there's a lot wrong with this game. But regardless, let's go through each of them. The first game would release in November 2007 on Wii and January 2008 on DS. Yes, they made a DS game. These games would consist of 24 real-life Olympic events, which use the Wii Remote and sometimes the nunchuck in a variety of ways, like swinging the Wii Remote for running or aiming at the Wii Remote sensor to shoot a gun with Shadow the Hedgehog. Oh yeah, Shadow's in this game. Let's spam a year of Shadow the Hedgehog in the chat. Speaking of Shadow, there's a large cast of characters in this first game, 16 to be exact, 8 from each series. Each of the characters even have their own stats. For example, Sonic is fast, and Bowser is slow but strong. There's also different modes like Single Match, where you can play any game whenever you want after you've unlocked it, and the main mode is Circuit Mode, which gives you a few games at a time, and you compete to get the best score, and by the end, you get a trophy. It's similar to Grand Prix, but with multiple sports. This is also a mode that you unlock events from, including Dream Events. Dream Events are the sports that aren't real sports, and are only in a dream, like a race where you can throw Koopa shells at people. And oh boy, this one burns the arms. That's pretty much the entire game. Wash, rinse, repeat, and collect new sports. You can also go for the best record. But we also have a DS exclusive mode that lets you play with other people in local co-op. This is mostly how I enjoyed it most as a child. As a kid, I played a ton of this, literally non-stop. My brother and I had a handful of friends that would boot it up and just play circuit matches all day. We even had a Mario and Sonic themed birthday party. Some things never change. This is just the perfect game with two franchises we couldn't get enough of. And after revisiting it today, I definitely see the appeal. The opening cutscene is fantastic and even graceful. I had a fun time replaying some of these events, but I also couldn't help but be a little more nitpicky than when I was a little baby. For example, on the Wii version, table tennis is so finicky, and randomly just doesn't work or register my movements. And as I mentioned earlier, the stats on characters are just kind of pointless, especially when all you're doing is shaking a controller and timing specific moves. If anything, it can be a little unfair at times, like in the 100-meter race. If you're in a circuit and one person is Bowser and another person is Sonic, regardless, if you both shake as fast as you can, Sonic is gonna win, unless one of you's a hummingbird, because you know, they flap their wings fast. At the end of the day, these are all just mini games with motion controls, and the motion controls aren't particularly in-depth either. After a while, the game starts to become a little repetitive, especially after all the load screens and replays and matches of the same sports over and over again. Like with jumping, I had to do the same thing multiple times in a row, and there was replays I had to skip every time. Speaking of repetition, some of the voice lines would repeat very often. Just listen. I know I'm being a little hard on these games, but this is just something I noticed after looking back at the first installment now that I'm older. Even though I adored these games as a kid, even though the game was awarded Best Wii Game in 2007, it was given mixed reviews, scoring 67 on Metacritic. Some common complaints were the fact that these two massive mascots weren't a more traditional game fans were used to, like a platformer of sorts, and instead just placed in a party game with mini games, which seemed to be simply marketing the Olympics. It was very common to see people think the motion controls on the Wii version were boring and frustrating. Mini games had unintuitive controls which required frantic and complex inputs, and events were criticized for being short, shallow, and repetitive. Similar things were said about the DS version, but most people, including myself, found the DS version overall was a lot more engaging long-term due to the simpler, more intuitive touchscreen controls that didn't make you sweat as much. However, the immersion of the Wii made it more popular overall in group settings, but regardless, the game sold well and was a decent first shot at a crossover, and even moved over 10 million copies worldwide. But next, we got Sonic at the Olympic Games on mobile phones. This technically isn't a Mario and Sonic game, but it is a Sonic at the Olympic Games game that was released during the 2008 Beijing Olympics for mobile phones. This really isn't anything more than that. This was on those old dumb phones before smartphones were super big. So there's a fun fact. Around 2 years after the first game was released, we heard rumors about a sequel, first coming from the Spanish Nintendo magazine, Nintendo Acción, where they mentioned this game would be created for the 2010 Winter Olympics. Eventually, on February 12, 2009, Sega and Nintendo would announce the games properly at a joint press conference, and revealed the game would yet again be made by Sega and closely supervised by Nintendo. The game's development began directly after the first title was finished in 2007. During the game's development, the Wii Motion Plus was revealed, and the Sega team contemplated whether they should add support to this game, but ultimately decided against it due to the potential upgrade not being in every household. The game was released in October 2009 simultaneously on both Wii and DS. This time around, things are primarily the same. It's a sports game with multiple events controlled by the Wii Remote's unique features, but there's a few upgrades. Instead of mostly shaking the Wii Remote vigorously, this game dialed it back a bit and mostly relied on tilting the Wii Remote and more elegant Wiimote uses. And heck, even uses the Wii Balance Board as an option in some games. They clearly took some feedback from the previous games about most of the events being too physically taxing. And they also replaced a lot of the touchscreen controls on the DS and made roughly half the games button controlled, which I don't mind at all. All the characters from the previous entry are here as well as 4 new ones: Donkey Kong, Metal Sonic, Bowser Jr., and Silver. Due to the better level design and controls, I found the game a lot more entertaining and engaging. Not only was this the most nostalgic game out of the bunch for me, but there was a lot they added to this installment that kept me playing, like the festival mode. In this, you're going through a variety of events, and interspersed throughout, you'll battle several bosses from the series like King Boo. Look how scary this guy looks. I don't know what it is, but it was just so fun for me to see these bosses here. Let's not forget about the Miis. You can now customize your player and gear. So of course, I dripped myself out with Shadow merch and made my Mii look, oh dear. And although I mentioned the events are a lot better than the first game, they can still be a little finicky at times with the motion controls. I also noticed some slight performance issues, like with this Dream event. For some reason, it chugged. It could be the game itself or maybe multiplayer. But this was the only time it was this bad. Speaking of events, hockey is in this game and it's better than NHL 25. Fight me. And for the differences between the Wii and the DS version, this is largely the same, but the DS story mode allows you to walk around as Mario and Sonic in an overworld map. Like what? Mario and Sonic at the Winter Olympic Games learned a lot from the previous entry, but what did the critics say at the time? Well, on Metacritic, the game scored 72 on Wii and 76 on DS, with official Nintendo Magazine UK saying, "This is a highly accomplished party game that stands out head and shoulders above the mess of shovelware garbage out there, even if it does lack the depth of its slightly more meaty handheld brother." Nintendo Life says, "It may not have the control genius of Wii Sports Resort, but it's every bit as good in terms of content, presentation, and pure distilled fun." Whereas Nintendo Power says, "Solid title, I'm still waiting for the series to live up to the full potential of both the top-class team-up of its stars and companies behind it, but in the meantime, they're still fun to be had." Whereas IGN says, "Mario and Sonic at the Olympic Winter Games isn't a bad choice on Wii, it's just way too generic for more players to get into. We've seen many of these events before, oftentimes within stronger packages, first-party Nintendo offerings, or full-fledged standalone games." The game faced criticisms for its excessive or inconsistent motion controls, with IGN pointed out that this distracted from the experience. But still, without a doubt, this winter entry continued the game's rise in popularity, so much so they had to do another, with Mario and Sonic at the 2012 London Olympic Games. Why is the box art yellow? As for overall development of this game, there's a lot less to say. They saw the sales from previous installments and it was quickly greenlit. The game released in November 2011 on Wii and February 2012 on 3DS. As for the game itself, once again, they took feedback from the previous games, changing a lot of the events from the first installment and fine-tuning the motion controls and even including simple button controls for a lot of them, making this version more accessible. I also like how they made all the mini-games available in free play from the beginning as opposed to having you play through some sort of story mode to unlock them. This makes jumping in with friends a lot easier at the beginning and was a pleasant surprise. I really liked having all the Dream events to play right away as well, because these are some of the best there are. But the biggest issue with the Wii version has to be the single player mode, more the lack of one. This time around, instead of a single player mode, there is a brand new London party mode. In this, your main goal is to fill out a sticker sheet. This is kind of hard to explain, so bear with me. Pretty much 4 players are on this map shaped like a maze. In this maze, you'll be able to interact with other players, collect coins, and try and get more stickers. Throughout the party mode, you'll be able to play various mini-games. Not Olympic games, just brand new mini-games that have nothing to do with the Olympics. I told my wife we were playing an Olympics game, and now we're playing tag with the Shy Guy. For some reason, they added a huge amount of mini-games to play in this mode, trying to make it like Mario Party. Don't get me wrong, you do still play some events from the Olympics, but these random cheap-feeling mini-games are just kind of thrown in. All this for competing for stickers. Once you receive stickers, you can add them to your sticker sheet. After placing them, there are a few things that could happen. They might have a specific effect that helps you, and if you land on these question blocks, something random will happen. Might give you more stickers or might screw you over. This just felt random. Why is this even here? This should be a mode in a Mario Party game, not Mario and Sonic at the Olympic Games London 2012. But I remember as a kid, this was not that fun, and I played it maybe once, and I completely understand why. It's kind of complicated, and the game isn't nearly as fun as just playing the Olympic events. The overall feeling of the Wii version is much better, and I must say, this game looks amazing for a Wii game. So while it has its pros and cons, in my eyes, I like the events, but the other modes will not keep me playing. Now what about the 3DS version? There's an entire story mode that's not in the Wii version. That's wild. It's about how Bowser and Eggman don't have invites, so they ruin everything with fog. I never said it was good, but the biggest problem, for some reason, you can't play as any character you want in all of the games. Each event is limited to a specific set of 4 characters total, and only those 4 characters, which is kind of really dumb, and removes a huge part of the enjoyment for me, and I think is why the game didn't stick for me as long when I was younger. It just didn't make any sense, especially if you can already play as all the characters on the Wii version. Also, the character models are just kind of boring, and the gameplay is just fine. This is the first DS version that I don't feel is on par with the console counterpart, and it definitely seems rushed. I'm not ranking these games today, but if I was, I'd probably put it in D tier. Just saying. I just get that vibe. The game received mixed reviews, with both the Wii and 3DS versions getting a 66 Metacritic score. Several critics noted both strengths and weaknesses. Some people liked the London Party mode as a standout feature that fully utilized the UK setting, and as I mentioned, the visuals were also praised. But IGN says, but the actual sports, they're the same here as they were 4 years ago, and anyone who's already got a copy of the first Mario and Sonic Olympic game sitting on their shelf doesn't need the double dip. And Game Informer says, as a party game, London Games succeeds rarely, but its implementation combination of recognizable and unrecognizable characters from Mario and Sonic is perfect. It definitely has all your favorite characters in it, but that's not enough of a reason to play. And Nintendo Life says, what felt fresh and enjoyable 4 years ago doesn't cut the mustard in 2011, particularly when some elements have been stripped out or reworked to poor effect. London Party Mode is poor alternative of the dozens of superior Wii Party games, and while its cast of gaming greats is enough to forgive some of its mistakes, it's pretty far off the mark. It's clear that this game didn't quite stick the landing that most fans had hoped. While it did improve on a handful of things, there are still some lacking features, mainly single player modes and all playable characters in the 3DS version for me. And I think this is where we started to see the potential fall of the series as a whole, but thankfully, Nintendo and Sega gave it another go. Shortly after, with Mario and Sonic at the Winter Olympic Games Sochi 2014, the first Wii U game of the series. And this is the first entry that doesn't have a handheld counterpart. This was released in November 2014 and was the first game that included an online multiplayer mode. This game was also published by Nintendo, as Sega published all previous game entries. At the time, Sega had signed an exclusivity agreement with Nintendo to have new Sonic games only on Nintendo platforms like Sonic Boom and Sonic Lost World, which I find interesting and shows even more cooperation between the franchises. I remember buying this game way back in the day and getting a free light blue controller bundled with it. I thought this deal was awesome. I was so excited to play the game too, and when I was finally able to, I don't remember sticking with it for too long, and I remember getting bored rather quickly. But after booting it back up, I have some thoughts. First of all, this game looks fantastic. I liked how they used the gamepad for specific minigames, and how the Wii Motion Plus was finally getting used. I also think the Dream events were interesting and worth playing a few times, but I mostly liked the new story mode, the Legends Showdown, which splits characters into groups and makes them compete with evil versions of themselves. Other than that, it's just a Mario and Sonic game. I didn't really have any major issues with this game, but that's because I've been playing these games so close together and watching them evolve in different ways, I think. Anyways, a lot of people didn't really like this game. It scored 55 on Metacritic, making this the worst reviewed game by far in Mario and Sonic history. 55 on Metacritic is bad. But why was there so much hate? Level 7 NU says, the third Olympic Games with Mario and Sonic is the worst one yet. It offers very few events worth playing and manages to be a party game that doesn't feel easy to pick up. On top of that, you need an entire arsenal of different controllers to even play it. Metro Game Central says, the worst Mario and Sonic game yet, and not just a waste of a crossover, but a genuinely poor minigame compilation, and one that makes both the Wii U and the gamepad look bad. Game Reactor Sweden says, the latest installment in the Mario and Sonic series just feels sloppy instead of the HD reboot it should have been. It's way too similar to the previous games, and they clearly haven't had a single clue how to utilize the Wii U gamepad for the events. And Digital Champ says, it's unfocused, uneven, and typically not much fun thanks to the transient nature of most of its content. So it became quite clear at this point that a lot of people were just sick of the minigame trope, but the main issue was the poor use of the gamepad and the need to swap controllers that made this game struggle. Like with the rock tossing one, you had to draw a path on the Wii U gamepad, which there was really no point in. Or I don't remember what it's called, but the game where you swap between the gun and the skiing, you had to go back and forth. It just, yeah, it didn't really make much sense. This is definitely a huge blow to the series, and left a bad taste for the franchise moving forward. But this wasn't the end, as they still released a game in time for the next Olympics with Mario and Sonic at the Rio 2016 Olympic Games on Wii U, and also a 3DS version as well. Most likely they wanted to cater to a larger group of people that were still on the 3DS version. This game released March 2016 on 3DS and June on the Wii U, and you'll never believe it. It's a game that lets you play events based on the Summer Olympics. Shocker. There have been some changes with this one that actively destroyed a lot of the previous complaints from the other entries. This time around, motion controls were removed from a majority of the events across the Wii U and the 3DS versions, addressing the issues that a lot of players had with them. As I mentioned, I didn't think they were that bad, but I do like the simple use of button controls. And also, by removing most of the reliance on motion controls, this prevents the need to change from gamepad to controller mid-game, as we saw with Sochi. I can't complain about the minigames, as I thought they were pretty fun, especially soccer. That slaps. And mamma mia, the graphics are spectacular on the Wii U version. But what I really enjoyed about this game was the single-player gameplay. Here you play as your Mii, and you can customize them to give them stat boost as you go through the Olympics and play games. And I also think it's cool how you're just running around as your Mii character in the overworld as you decide what you want to do and interact with other characters. This was also used when people played and shared things on Miiverse. RIP Miiverse. While the main single-player mode is all about your Mii and upgrading it, it ends up being a bulk of the single-player experience. Don't get me wrong, I actually really enjoyed it, but it really takes away from the Mario and Sonicness of it. Like, I want to play a Shadow. And there's also a lot of loading screens, but that's fine, whatever. Now in the 3DS version, this game is pretty much just like the Wii U iteration regarding the story. I feel like it has definitely upgraded compared to the last 3DS installments, but you might be asking why I'm so angry. Because you still can't play as any character you want in any event. Bruh. I'm assuming they did this again because they didn't want to animate every character for every event to save space on the cart or something, which again, is just kind of dumb. That actually removes a lot of the charm. Now, maybe I didn't play long enough to unlock additional additional characters for specific events, but I think it's too bad. I will say, at least there are some unique character features like how Bowser and Knuckles had different jab speeds during boxing, but that's the biggest difference I found, and the only reason why they would limit the amount of characters they use. Maybe they want to make unique movesets for every character based on the event that they're playing in, but then again, if they already did it on the Wii, why don't they just do it on the 3DS? I don't know. But still, it's definitely more polished than the last game. The Metacritic scores this time around rose slightly to 65 on the Wii U and 60 on the 3DS. The Wii U version had mixed opinions, with Cube saying, overall, Mario and Sonic at the Rio 2016 Olympic Games on Nintendo's Wii U is a decent addition to the series, but lacking anything special to elevate it to that next level. Level Up says, once again, the people behind the series deliver a mediocre game that feels as if it was developed to fulfill a commitment instead of being made to please fans from Sonic and Mario with a great experience they would enjoy. The 3DS version also had mixed reviews, with Digital Chump saying, overall, Mario and Sonic Rio 2016 Olympic Games feels like many of the event-based games that came before it, full of events, but shallow in substance. The lack of an online multiplayer mode and the inability to play as Mario or Sonic in any event makes his entry in the Mario and Sonic games a bore. But there was also another system that this game was on that I almost guarantee you didn't know. This game was also in arcades. That's right, and this was actually kind of awesome. While I never managed to find one in person, looking at videos online, it's pretty cool. There's a big immersive 55-inch vertical screen, and games are controlled using foot sensor controls and two big joysticks. This is perfect for swimming, running, and jumping. I think this was a really unique idea, and they could even link up to 4 units if you wanted to play with 4 friends. But still, at this point, it's clear that people were getting tired of the shallow minigames and the repetitive tropes of the Olympic Games. This was also around the time that people were done with the Wii U, and the Switch, known as the NX at the time, was being heavily talked about. And a Wii U game like this wasn't worth investing to, especially after the trash they got the last entry. And we can see that with the game selling roughly only 500,000 units on Wii U and 7,000 units on 3DS, which again, was much lower than most previous titles, showing a continuing downward trend. I think Nintendo recognized the complaints here and decided to give the series some space before attempting to market another one, as this is why for the first time in 10 years, they wouldn't be making an Olympics game for the upcoming Pyeongchang 2018 Winter Olympics. And honestly, I don't think anyone really cared. I don't think I even noticed. With the fantastic lineup Nintendo was serving up on the new Nintendo Switch console, I didn't really care for a new Mario and Sonic game at the time. But then during Nintendo's 2019 E3 presentation, Mario and Sonic at the Olympic Games Tokyo 2020 was revealed to be coming to the Nintendo Switch. I was moderately excited for this one. This game includes a surprising amount of content. You have the story mode, which is actually not that bad. There's this time machine that throws the characters back into the 1964 Olympics, which is a cool spin on things. This introduces the classic events. Not only are you playing a wide variety of events in 3D like traditional Mario and Sonic games, but we get the new 2D style games with the characters' older 8-bit and 16-bit styles. And of course, we can't forget about the Dream events. This game also has a lot more characters and new events too. So even though they added a ton of content, at the end of the day, this is still a Mario and Sonic game, and when I played it a few years ago for a video, I was pretty annoyed at how short all of these events were, and how shallow a lot of them still feel. Gameplay doesn't feel super tight, and there's not too much to do aside from the story mode. Again, the story mode is probably the best story mode we've seen in the series, but still, there's just some things that aren't that great. I mean, the graphics themselves are good, but the text boxes are just like kind of boring. Lots of people once again gave mixed reviews, much like the previous entries, with the Metacritic score of 69. With Destructoid saying, Mario and Sonic at the Olympic Games Tokyo 2020's retro suit is compact, but it kicks everything up a notch. But then there's IGN who says, this latest entry in the Mario and Sonic at the Olympic Games series sports the best collection yet of minigames and events, but it's hampered by a tedious story mode and overall poor execution. Again, there's nothing blatantly wrong about this game specifically, but the development team at Sega really should have pumped more time and resources into making this a game you come back to after you've played through it once. And the 2020 Olympic Games are also really weird because it wasn't the only Olympic Games game made this year by Sega with Sonic. That's right, somehow, Sega made more than one Olympics game for the broader audience and released it on multiple platforms, including the Switch. It was largely the same and debatably even better in some cases, in my opinion. Let's not forget to mention, they also made an arcade game for this one as well, except this time it was a little different than the previous one. Instead of the joysticks, it has buttons, and of course, it's based on the Tokyo Olympics. Other than that, it's an arcade game, baby, and it only cost $12,000 if I wanted one. Unfortunately, I can't yet, but hey, if you want to become a member and support the channel, maybe one day I'll have a sweet Mario and Sonic arcade game here with me. I'll share it. My curiosity got the best of me and I wanted to go see if I could find one. So let's go do that. It turns out they do have Mario and Sonic, but it's not the Mario and Sonic I'm looking for. But that's not all there was in store for 2020. They also released another mobile game that only recently got discontinued. And also, it wasn't Mario and Sonic at the Olympic Games, it was just Sonic at the Olympic Games. This is just a watered down touchscreen version. And while a lot of these don't include Mario, it's still a part of the franchise, so I need to mention it. And I think this is why it felt extremely stretched thin. None of these games were long lasting and had very little replay value. Sega did way too much with the Olympics license and clearly couldn't innovate the way they needed to keep this partnership afloat. The Olympics team must have seen that because instead of renewing their video game partnership with Sega, they decided to end things. According to former Mario and Sonic developer Lee Cocker, in an interview with Eurogamer, it turns out the International Olympic Committee, also known as the IOC, decided to break up the iconic partnership between Nintendo and Sega, saying they wanted to explore other alternatives, whatever that means. Apparently, the IOC is now more interested in NFTs and esports, because nothing says Olympic spirits like digital collectibles and pro gaming. That's right, the IOC went full crypto, bro. Officially, the IOC hasn't confirmed or denied this, but it seems like this might be the end of the series altogether. I think it's clear that there's not much hope for this franchise moving forward, but I don't think this should be the end of Mario and Sonic's story. How about we give the fans what we want and make a Mario and Sonic game that isn't part of a shallow party pack game? Why can't we see Mario and Sonic in an action-packed 2D or 3D platformer, or literally anything else? I'm not saying it would be fantastic, I'm just saying it'd be a refreshing new take on the series. The idea of these two console legends together in one game is still wild to think about, and although we've already seen them together in video game crossovers like Smash Bros, they could definitely create something more substantial. But hey, do you want to see a new Mario and Sonic game? Let me know in the comments. And please consider becoming a channel member to support me. I would really appreciate it and love it. Also join the free Discord. If you want to see the rise and fall of the Pokemon series on Nintendo Switch, click here. I have to see you in the next one. See you later.